Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to another very exciting Star Wars video. Today we are returning to Andor Season 2. I thought I was done talking about it, but it turns out we haven't covered the very important topic of the missing episodes. And you might be wondering, hang on a second, what do you mean missing episodes? There were 12 episodes per season, very little was left on the cutting room floor. This isn't like other shows where there are fully fledged, deleted scenes. What am I talking about? Well, when Season 2 actually dropped, I made a bunch of videos covering deleted concepts that nearly made it into the final script, but didn't. Those weren't deleted scenes in the conventional sense, because they weren't all filmed. Some of them were rehearsed, and many were just ideas that the creatives had, but then they were cut. Well, today, my friends, we've just learned there were thousands of ideas that didn't make the final version, and I want to talk about those I haven't spoken about. I also covered Perrin's admission to Mon that he knew what she was up to, but never reported her to the Empire and had her back. This would have been Perrin's redemption, but now we have information about another scene where Mon goes back to Chandrila and tries to apologize to her daughter. This is going to be one heck of a video. And today, my friends, we also have some new behind-the-scenes stills. So no more jibber-jabber, let's dive straight in. So the revelations come from both Tony and Dan Gilroy. And Tony said this: there were thousands of ideas, all kinds of different things. I make a big mess, then I start to get organized. There are things that were left out because they were too extravagant or indulgent. And one of these scrapped ideas was Emperor Palpatine. As we know, he never considered Darth Vader. He was too big of a character, too grandiose to write into a show like this. But when it came to Palpatine, Tony Gilroy nearly said yes, and Lucasfilm was about to reach out to Ian McDiarmid. Now, I think this comment has been brought up in the past, but Tony Gilroy abandoned this idea because he realized Palpatine is very tricky to write for, and he works better as a Sauron archetype, the puppet master pulling the strings of the Empire but who never appears on screen. And it turns out, this wasn't just a 1-second consideration or second thought and then he just threw it away. Working Palpatine into Andor Season 2 was something they genuinely tried to do, but they just couldn't find the right angle and the right way to do it, to do the character and the show justice. Because you have to balance Palpatine being consistent with the prequels and the original trilogy, while also ensuring he doesn't distract from the show, which turned out to be impossible, so they scrapped it. But could you imagine just how incredible a Gilroy-written Palpatine monologue would be? With Ian McDiarmid's delivery, his background in Shakespearean theatre, it would be a masterpiece.
Greetings this Easter Sunday, the day of resurrection.
But like I said, would it be in line with how George Lucas wrote him? Or would it be more advanced? Could it swing the opposite way and feel out of character? I've often thought about things like this. The villain I want to see Gilroy write is Thrawn, but they considered a bunch of different avenues. A whole bunch of different ways to bring Palpatine into this season. Maybe in the Senate scenes, but then again by this point, just before he disbanded the Senate, Palpatine had no interest in diplomatic affairs. Or maybe it's a scene where Krennic approached him. Another cool idea was a similar scene to the end of Revenge of the Sith, where Palpatine instead of Krennic is watching over the construction of the Death Star. But I'm glad Tony Gilroy didn't cave in. This series was never meant to be about the main characters of Star Wars, so I'm glad they kept it that way. So now on to a deleted scene you've probably not heard about. Just like the Perrin scene, this one is another version of Mon Mothma saying goodbye, but instead of it just being a heart-to-heart with her husband, in the final arc, Mon Mothma was about to return to Chandrila. After giving her Senate speech and making her escape off Coruscant, she became crippled with anxiety about how her words would affect her family. So before rendezvousing with Phoenix Squadron, she made one stop along the way. She wanted to find her daughter Leader to explain why she did what she had done, because her Senate speech was renowned across the galaxy by this point, and she wanted to explain to Leader the reason the rebellion had to be founded. She didn't expect Leader to understand. So apparently there was a scene where Mon goes back to the same house that we saw at the wedding, but it's now empty. The drapes are billowing, and there is complete and utter silence. She goes upstairs, and Perrin is there, and they have a really heavy conversation. Like I said in one of the versions, Perrin was going to admit to Mon Mothma that he knew everything, the funding for the rebellion, her plans to defect, but in this iteration of the scene, the conversation centers around the future of their daughter, and how Perrin is going to be the one to have to look after her, now that Mon is on the run, and is about to become the leader of the Rebel Alliance. Even though Leader is married, she is just a child, and they're both very worried about her. It sounds like one of the heaviest conversations the entire show would have had to offer. There's a tense anger, a frustration on the part of Mon's husband, because he feels he could have been part of it. But now that their daughter's married off, he's worried. He doesn't know what her future's gonna look like, if she's gonna resent her mother, which she probably did. And I guess in a way, with all of this context, the saddest part is what we see at the end of the show. Perrin ends up having an affair with Skolden's wife, the mother of his daughter's husband. Things didn't end up well for him. He fell completely off the wagon, is back on the booze, and presumably is gambling again, which was a big problem in the first season if you remember. And it's a bit ironic considering his speech about joy at Leader's wedding. He found rock bottom. And in this version, which I think was just conceptual, we see Mon getting to the Ghost. I don't know if they show us the Ghost crew themselves, but Dan Gilroy says, quote, "There were a couple of beats there, so I wonder if they were going to make more connections to Star Wars Rebels," which funnily enough, Tony Gilroy said he didn't really care about. So maybe there was more to the original script, but I guess we'll never know. The final version is what we got, and the creatives are adamant that was the best version, because they were also aware of budget and time constraints. There's a lot more Tony Gilroy wanted to throw in, but in the end they figured anything that wastes time or is unnecessary and doesn't add anything to the central plot can be chucked away. I do personally think it's a shame they didn't do anything with Mon's family though. Resolutions between Mon and her daughter were left to the imagination. And so now, my dear friends, we move on to K2SO. I've already covered comments by Alan Tudyk, where he revealed certain lines of dialogue were changed. At times he just improvised, and the creators rolled with it. But did you know, some of the conversations of Cassian and K2 getting to know each other were scrapped. This would have been at the end of episode 9, right after Cassian gets Bix's message that she's left. In this version, there would have been additional comedy, but Tony Gilroy decided it took away from the gravity of the episode, and there was enough comic relief in the episodes to come, especially when Cassian, K2 and Melshi rescue Clea. And speaking of which, there's an amazing bit of K2SO dialogue that many fans overlooked. As they were arriving on Coruscant, K2 reveals that Melshi's never been to Coruscant, but the droid remembers the last time he was there, and Star Wars fans are only now realizing the dark reason that K2 was on Coruscant. He says it was for a parade. He was just one of hundreds of KX units. And the event he was talking about was probably Empire Day. This was part of Palpatine's Ascension Week, commemorating the day he declared himself Emperor. There were celebrations across Coruscant, and K2 was part of it. So even though he's been reprogrammed and he's a good droid, he still has his memories. And this in a way was a very dark revelation. And speaking of dark moments with K2SO, there was an entire K2SO episode that was scrapped, giving us a much darker way that he arrives on Yavin. I've already covered that, and it should be on your screen now. But with that said, my dear friends, that brings us to the end of today's Andor Season 2 video. I hope you had fun. I hope you enjoyed it. Share your thoughts down below. If you enjoyed this one, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up. Subscribe if you're new. Check me out on socials. And may the Force be with you always.